as many of us have seen this event that took place in the media with the story of Aaron Bushnell, the United States Air Force member who self-immolated in front of the Israel embassy in Washington, D.C. And for those of you who have not seen the video, I encourage you to go watch it because if Aaron Bushnell, sacrificed pretty much his life for his idea of not wanting to comply with genocide, the least that we can do is observe what he was saying in the video and observe the video so that we can understand his message. And Aaron Bushnell is really a modern day version of John Brown, in my opinion. The reason why I say that is because we know the history of John Brown, and we know the history of him fighting on the African side to end slavery. And in his time, John Brown did not want to be complicit with the institution of slavery, and he actively fought against it. In Aaron Bushnell's time, he did not want to be complicit with genocide that is taking place in Gaza, in Israel. And also, he did not want to be complicit with Israel being able to effectively operate an apartheid state. And these are some of the things that he spoke about. If you listen to the comments that were made by some of the people who were against Aaron Bushnell, like Laura Loomer, who on Twitter had this to say: "This is what mental illness looks like. If I don't care if he is a veteran, there's no honor in supporting Islamic terrorists." And of course, you can see what it says down in the bottom. Laura Loomer, who happens to be Jewish and is going to, of course, side with anything Israel, if she would have listened to his message, nowhere in his message did he say anything about supporting Islamic terrorism. But Laura Loomer views Hamas as terrorists, whereas the Palestinians view Hamas as freedom fighters. If we go back to the 1950s and the 1960s, Didan Kimathi was viewed in the eyes of white people as a terrorist. Even though the British were in his land, colonizing his land, forcing his people, the Kikuyu people, off of their land, committing genocide on the Kikuyu people. So he rose up to fight against that. And around the world, with the British media and the way they portrayed what they called the Mau Mau, they were considered to be terrorists. As Dr. Khalid Muhammad said, the great ancestor, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So anytime you get an outlook from somebody that consider themselves Jewish, in most cases, they're going to side with Israel, as we also saw with Adam Kinzinger. Now, here we have a double standard, because if we remember, when the Ukrainian soldier blew himself up, committed suicide, Adam Kinzinger saluted him and called him a hero. He said that hero Ukrainian soldier blows himself up to destroy a bridge and stop Russian invasion forces storming in from Crimea. But now that Aaron Bushnell self-immolated to protest the Israel-Hamas war, Adam Kinzinger, the same Adam Kinzinger, says that suicide is not heroic. This shows you the hypocrisy in the Jews who support Zionism. And if we go and we look at some of his other statements, Aaron Bushnell's statements, like the one that he made on his social media account, Here he says that many of us like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I was alive during slavery or the Jim Crow South or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is you're doing it right now. So Aaron Bushnell, a European, named 3 incidents that all related to black people: slavery, Jim Crow, and apartheid. So what this is telling me is that he's not someone who is just looking at the geopolitical situations now, like what's happening in Gaza. He's also using the historical context, and it's relating to African people. He's using the historical context to put the two things into perspective. And what he's saying is exactly right. And this relates to both black and white people. Because on one end, he's asking, you know, what would you do if you lived during these times? If you're a black person, what would you be doing? Would you be complying? Would you be fighting? Would you be escaping? If you're a white person, what would you be doing? Would you be committing the genocide? Would you be fighting against it like John Brown did? So this is a question where anybody who sees this, you have to look in the mirror. You have to ask yourself, seriously, what would I be doing in those times? And as he stated, if you look in the mirror at what you're doing now, it tells a lot about what you would have been doing back then.
Right.
But when he went through this self-immolation, it was such a powerful protest that it forced the mainstream media to at least cover what he had to say. Because a lot of times, let's say if he would have went in and shot up a building or shot up a synagogue or something like that with a lot of people in it, let's say if he went and did that, it's no way, if he wrote a manifesto, it's no way they would have read that manifesto, anything from it, on the media. They would have dismissed him as a terrorist. They would have been able to demonize him. They would have been able to say that this is a part of the problem. But because his protest only hurt himself, he didn't go out and kill anybody. He was basically willing to say, I'm so extreme in my ideals that I'm willing to die for what I believe in. It forced mainstream media outlets like CNN to actually read his statement that he made on the video. And we saw reactions to this on Twitter. You see on Twitter, this guy saying, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Aaron Bushnell's last words were just read live on CNN. This is how much people know that the media is a control mechanism, primarily by Israel, as we covered on previous shows. So I wonder if they actually had to get this statement cleared by Israel, or if because there's been so much backlash by whistleblowers at ESPN, at CNN, you know, all of these are related, but at CNN, I wonder if because there was so much backlash from the whistleblowers that they decided to put this out. But he can say, it says, I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest. But compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine, and they went on to say, you know, the rest of his statement, this is not extreme at all. So interesting enough, if Aaron Bushnell would have self-immolated and he would have stood there and said, free the hostages until he collapsed, President Biden would have did an emergency broadcast to celebrate a United States military personnel person for a courageous form of protest to support the Israeli hostages being freed by Hamas. It would have been broadcasted across all media networks. There would not have been one person on any of the networks to point to anything about his mental state, even when they tried to say he was mentally ill. They would have celebrated Aaron Bushnell because he spoke in support of the Palestinians. They called them, mentally disturbed. The ADL came out and made a statement saying that we've done the research on him and, he's pro-Hamas. And, this is what the ADL does with anybody that does not go along with the Zionist agenda. They paint that person as a demon or somehow anti-Semitic. But I want to play a short clip of some comments that were made by President Obama. And this was back in 2011, where President Obama took a moment to acknowledge the quote unquote heroic act of self-immolation by Mohammed Bouazizi in Tunisia. This is an Arab in Tunisia who Obama praised for his self-immolation as an act of heroism based on that country's quote unquote actions against his own citizens. Take a listen to this.
That story of self-determination began 6 months ago in Tunisia. On December 17th, a young vendor named Mohammed Bouazizi was devastated when a police officer confiscated his cart. This was not unique. It's the same kind of humiliation that takes place every day in many parts of the world. The relentless tyranny of governments that deny their citizens dignity. Only this time something different happened. After local officials refused to hear his complaints, this young man, who had never been particularly active in politics, went to the headquarters of the provincial government, doused himself in fuel, and lit himself on fire. There are times in the course of history when the actions of ordinary citizens spark movements for change because they speak to a longing for freedom that has been building up for years. In America, think of the defiance of those patriots in Boston who refused to pay taxes to a king, or the dignity of Rosa Parks as she sat courageously in her seat. So it was in Tunisia, as that vendor's act of desperation tapped into the frustration felt throughout the country. Hundreds of protesters took to the streets, then thousands. And in the face of batons and sometimes bullets, they refused to go home, day after day, week after week, until a dictator of more than 2 decades finally left power.
So you heard Obama talk about how the impact of that self-immolation led to change and led to people taking action. And this is what strikes the most fear in all of the Zionists and pro-Zionists in the United States and around the world. Because this is a situation where they can't demonize Aaron Bushnell and fool people into believing that their agenda is positive. When people look at what Aaron Bushnell did and they watch that video, that's the type of spark that's going to cause people to go out and say, it's enough talking that's been done. We need to take action and put an end to what's happening in Gaza. And not just citizens in the United States, but the impact that it's going to have, or it is having, on leaders around the world. Leaders who are going to come together and say, we know that the U.S. is backing Israel, but guess what? We're willing to step in and take action to put an end to this, no matter what the consequences are. Mm-hmm. And this is what happens throughout history. You have moments in time where people do things that motivate people to take a step further. And, you know, this is African Liberation Media, and we've seen it talking about, you know, European and Aaron Bushnell, but no matter what color Aaron Bushnell is, you can recognize a man when you see one. And he had the conviction to put his life where his ideals were. And anybody that is willing to do that, you got to just tip your cap to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally think that what Aaron Bushnell did is going to lead to more action around the world, and it's pushed the pressure on Israel and puts Israel now, I believe, up against all odds, because there were people all around the world on X or Twitter discussing this protest. It even got an official statement from Hamas, who responded to what he did. So this is not something they're just going to be able to sweep under the rug and act like it didn't happen as much as they would like to. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, the ripple effect that it has in, you know, the rest of the military. You know, as you mentioned before we got on about, you know, a protest that took place in Portland where you had military officers burning their uniforms. So, you know, we'll see, you know, where this goes. But for Aaron Bushnell to do this at the age of 25, when most of us are saying, you know what, those young people in Gen Z or Gen X, they not really focused on change or politics or, you know, anything. Aaron Bushnell had a life. He could have lived this normal life, made a lot of money. You know, he was already in the IT. I'm pretty sure he had a comfortable salary in the military, and he was willing to give it all up.
Yeah, you know, you recognizing courage is just plain and simply recognizing courage. And this was an extremely courage. It's an extreme act. There's no doubt about it. Self-immolation. I remember the first time I saw something like this was during the war in Vietnam. And of course, I've always been like, you know, a person that thrived on information. So I was watching the evening news, Walter Cronkite or Huntley Brinkley, someone, and they showed this Buddhist monk setting himself on fire. I think it was in Saigon, which was the capital of then, you know, South Vietnam. Vietnam was then, you know, divided north and south, just like Korea is today, as a result of the overthrow of French colonialism. And it was an extreme act, but it was part of the global protest that was emerging at that time against the war in Vietnam. And so, you know, Howard Zinn does have this statement called "Small acts, when multiplied by many, can change the world." So I'm not advocating that people engage in that specific type of activity, but it can inspire people because people recognize that the courage. Let me just read just a bit about Bushnell. Got this from one of the media. Bushnell was originally from San Antonio, Texas, was raised in Massachusetts, and went to public schools on the Cape Cod Peninsula. So that probably tells you something about his lifestyle there. Growing up, you know, Bushnell studied computer software engineering at Southern New Hampshire University and took computer science courses at the University of Maryland Global Campus. Bushnell worked as a cyber defense operations specialist in the U.S. Air Force 70th Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Wing. He served in the 531st Intelligence Support Squadron, had been active duty since May 2020. Bushnell was also an aspiring software engineer, because this is just to reinforce what Brother Almost said about, you know, this, you know, the future that he had. So the question becomes, when a person from this kind of background on this kind of track. He was obviously motivated to serve his country, to join the U.S. military. And then while serving in the military, he sees these events erupting, in Gaza, occupied Palestine, by the Zionist terrorists, responding to Hamas, an attack by Hamas. And I'm gonna read some just a minute, what the ADL said that he said about Hamas. And he was moved, particularly when he received standby orders, I suppose from the Lord Austin, or through Lord Austin anyway, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to his commanders, to be on standby, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. I think he received this order in right after the incident, the ongoing war that's been taking place in Palestine since 1947, 1948, or even before that, really, if you want to go back to the events in the 1930s, in Palestine. They exploded on October the 7th, and the United States was preparing soldiers to be able to be ready to go to the Zionist state to defend them if they needed the help. And so he has these orders, and then he's seeing, this genocide take place. The genocide of Palestinian children. I mean, Lord Austin, his numbers may have been off by a few thousand. Maybe they were absolutely 100% accurate. When he was asked in a congressional hearing last week, how many women and children have been killed in Gaza? And Lord Austin, the Empire politician, military man, went to work in the military industrial complex and then joins the administration. I mean, this is the pattern, right? He said 25,000. Mm-hmm. The ratio of civilians to soldiers being killed in Gaza is unprecedented in world history. It's unprecedented in world history. And that's why Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, said what's taking place in Gaza is not a war. War takes place between armies. Okay, whether it's an irregular army, a guerrilla army, or whether it's actually like the United States versus Japan and the Soviet Union versus Nazi Germany. He said that's not what's taking place in Gaza is not a war, it's genocide. And so, that's why you have this statement that he said, I'm an active duty member of the United States. I will no longer be complicit in genocide. Mm-hmm. So what he saw taking place, based on the way he processed the information, based on his consciousness, he said, I won't be complicit in genocide. I'm not going. And it sort of reminds me of the, and it is interesting you mentioned this, because there was an anti-war movement within the U.S. military during the Vietnam War. It's captured in a documentary called Sir, No Sir. The Sir, No Sir protest, where people said, where they were told to attack a village of Vietnamese people, and the soldiers said, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. And in fact, I mean, there've even been some, Israel is, the Zionist state is regarded as having this great army. They don't really have a great army in terms of a standing army, because of the mandatory, military service, draft. Everybody has to serve, but most of the people are in the reserves. They're not actually active duty. And one of their most regarded as one of their most highly effective special operations units, commandos or whatever, said that they went to Gaza and they said they were not going back. Now, this is taking place within the Zionist state. Now, I don't know if these guys will be court-martialed, thrown in jail. They probably need them, so they probably ship them up north now, because a lot of people believe that even the United States says that they believe that the Zionist state is getting ready to attack Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's going to be a whole different fight than what they won't be able to kill that many children, women and children in Lebanon fighting Hezbollah. I guarantee you that. Okay, and they're going to take some heavy losses themselves. And why these mad people in the Biden administration, genocide Joe Biden, Zionist Kamala Harris, Zionist Anthony Blinken, Quimbo, Lloyd Austin, why these guys won't stop it. Plus, and all of their supporters in the U.S. Congress, like Hakeem Jeffries and Colonel Lindsey Graham, freezing Mitch McConnell, Zionist Chuck Schumer. Nobody is trying to stop the world from moving to the brink of disaster. But this is a young man that his consciousness was just raised. Now, obviously, I would think that he had been doing some reading, some studies and things, prior to that. As a matter of fact, the Anti-Defamation League, a Zionist organization, has come out and said, several anti-Israel activist groups have organized vigils in Bushnell's honor, including Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, New York, Cleveland, Houston, and Atlanta, in front of federal offices and Israeli consulates. Atlanta. I did not know that a young woman had committed self-immolation in front of the Israeli consulate in Atlanta in early December. And she was actually
under the rug.
Pardon?
They swept it under the rug.
Virtually no coverage.
They still haven't released her name. It's people on Twitter who've been trying to reach out to activists in Atlanta to try to identify who this woman was, and her identity is still unknown.
Her identity is still unknown. She was saved by, was it a black security guard, Brother Amos, that actually saved her from totally burning up? And she's still in the hospital. She's still alive. Was it a black security guard?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That rushed in, as opposed to the police officers that were, as Aaron Bushnell was burning up, you had this insane scene of police officers holding their guns on him. The man is on fire, burning up. What kind of mentality is this? And so they said, this is what the ADL said. Bushnell made multiple extreme anti-Israel posts on Reddit. Now check the consciousness here. Israel is, this is what they are saying that Bushnell said. Israel is a white supremacist, ethno-nationalist, settler colonial apartheid state. It has no right to exist. This is a guy in the U.S. military. Now, there have been some statements, that's been, once again, kept under the rug, that there is some anti-Zionist sentiment within the ranks of the U.S. military. Some of these people are probably white supremacists, but there are others that could be in the so no sir type of mentality regarding, because there are people who have served in the global war on terror who believe that their comrades died. They have comrades who are crippled, comrades who have suffered from PTSD, comrades who have committed suicide in the global war on terror, which these are people who have been in the military, blame the Zionist state, Israel, for the global war on terror. Okay, so that sentiment, I don't know how widespread it is, or it may be minuscule or whatever, but it's there. So this is what he's saying, okay? And it's regarding right to exist. I think he's saying this like in the context, we asked the question, we're not talking about the people. Like let's take Germany, for example. Did the Third Reich have a right to exist? We're not saying that the German people have a right to exist. Did that particular government have a right to exist? Look at the results of that government, right? 50 to 60 million people dead in a war that was started by Adolf Hitler. Now, Germany recovered thanks to the Marshall Plan, the United States pumping, billions of dollars, into Europe to reconstruct. And look at the German people today. The German people today exist in their country. It's sad that they support genocide, in Palestine, or at least their government does. There are a lot of protests in Germany, by the way. There's a lot of protests in the United Kingdom, Paris, all over the world, really, against this. So he's not talking about people. He's not talking about human beings. He's talking about governments here. Okay. So he wrote that on February 3rd. In an October 24th, 2023 post, he appeared to condone Hamas' October 7th attack on Israel, writing, "Can you or I really say that indigenous people are wrong for retaliating against colonizers who are rubbing their domination in their face?" He's posing a question. He is posing a question, and the speech that the representative from China gave at the International Court of Justice last week, the Zionist state is back in the International Court of Justice, where more than 50 countries are accusing them of violating the human rights of Palestinians via their occupation of the little bit of land that the Palestinians had left, after the partition of Palestine by the UN mandate after the war in 1948. It was partitioned. The Palestinians were given some land. The Zionists were given some land. And then in the 1967 war, the Zionists seized land that the Palestinians had on the West Bank and in the rest of the Zionist state. The only thing that they were left was what we call the Gaza Strip. Okay, so the Zionist state is back before the ICJ now, where more than 50 countries have made statements last week against their occupation, their illegal occupation of this Palestinian territory. And the representative from China got up and said that colonized people whose lands have been occupied, have an absolute right to armed self-defense, to arm themselves and liberate themselves. This is what the representative from China said. Now, at what point, almost, you and I have been saying this, at what point do these countries stop talking? We just see new sanctions that the Biden administration put on Russia just last week. That a new round of sanctions, and the sanctions are only making Russia stronger. They're trying to sanction, punish some of the countries that have been continuing to buy raw materials and goods and whatever from Russia. But at what point do these countries stop talking and actually take some kind of political, economic action?
I was talking to someone last week and I said, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes I wonder if the United States continuing to fund this war in Ukraine is a war strategy to keep Russia from being able to get involved in what's happening in Israel right now. Or even if they were to start a conflict with Iran, by having Russia engaged in Ukraine, it weakens their ability to be able to effectively support a nation like Iran in a war against the United States.
Right. Because it was Russia and Iran that stopped the plans of the American empire and NATO using the Islamic State and these other terrorists in Syria. Okay, So it was the combination of those two countries, you know, Russia and Iran, stopped the plans of the United States, the American Empire, and NATO to use the Islamic State to overthrow the Assad regime, you know, in Syria. So that's a very good point, because why do they keep dragging something out that is all but lost?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot who came up with the term, you know, let's keep funding them until they fight to the last Ukrainian. But that's a very good point you've made there. But at what point, my point is that at what all of these countries that, you know, we see now, also the Sandinista government in Nicaragua is taking it's Germany. They're taking Germany to the International Court of Justice for helping to finance or militarily support the Zionist state in the genocide. They're accusing Germany of complicity. So it seems like there seems to be some kind of coordinated effort here that's going on between, you know, a lot of these countries to, you know, so sooner or later, I'm sure someone is going to take the United States, charge them with complicity, the United Kingdom, charge them with complicity, France, charge them with complicity. This is turning the world over.
Mm-hmm.
From unipolar to multipolar, which will ultimately benefit us as African people, in my opinion.
It just goes to show how far all of these leaders and all of these nations will support Israel to their own demise. This has been another edition of the African Liberation Media Show. Leave your comments down in the comment section. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, brothers and sisters, a Bibi Fahodier.
Bibi Fahodier.